Some fantasy football players can win you your league. Others can lose you your league. However, I'm going to give you 6 players that could easily fall into either category. Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I am Garret Price, and today I want to talk about 6 of the most volatile players for your fantasy football season in 2022. Now, I want to say this specifically because I'm looking at this from a dynasty perspective. So what this means is when we're drafting at this time next year, these players could either be at the top of your ranking next year or be more or less irrelevant for your dynasty rankings next year. These players are crazy volatile. And the good part is if you can capitalize on the ones that are going to increase in value, you're going to get them fairly cheap. However, if you pay a hefty price for some of these guys, you're going to end up left holding the bag and getting absolutely squat. So the very first one we're going to talk about is Trey Lance. Trey Lance for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, there's a couple different things here with Trey Lance. First and foremost, we don't for sure know that he's the starter. There's a very good chance he could be the starter, but Jimmy Garoppolo is still on this football team, and it was a football team that went pretty far into the playoffs with Jimmy G. We saw a couple games from him last year. None of them were that great. They weren't terrible, but it was nothing special. And he could really be at the point where he could be this franchise quarterback for this team. I mean, he has the rushing upside for sure. He's got weapons like Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. So he has the opportunity to make some massive plays, but there's so much risk. Right now, you're having to pay a second round ADP value in Superflex leagues. If he can't establish himself as the starter, that is going to absolutely plummet. So there's a ton of risk there. But on the flip side, he could end up being one of these top 5, top 6 quarterbacks simply because of how much rushing matters in fantasy football. So Trey Lance is the top guy that we have on our list of our most volatile players. Next player on the list pains me because I love this player. I drafted him in quite a few leagues last year. I was touting him on the Dynasty Nerds podcast, and it looked really good for a bit there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Detroit Lions, fantasy football wide receiver. Started the year kind of slow. He had 2 games early on that were okay. 6 catches for 70 yards, 7 catches for 65 yards, but nothing special. A lot of other games where we're looking at 2, 3, 4 catches and not significant yardage. However, we get towards the end of the season. He has 6 straight games of 8 or more catches. And in 5 of those 6 games, he also had a touchdown catch. So we saw a couple games with over 100 yards in there, almost all of them over 90. So he was fantastic at the end of the year. And you're saying, well, that just sounds like a rookie that is poised to be solid, if not great, in year 2. And yes, on the surface, it seems that way. But we also have to remember that this team was missing TJ Hawkinson. This team was missing DeAndre Swift. They drafted Jameson Williams, and they signed DJ Chark in the offseason. Those are 4 players that could all significantly cut into his workload. He's not this big play guy. He really relies on volume. So if those 10 catches for 86 yards, 8 catches for 73, 8 for 90, all that kind of stuff at the end of the year, 8 for 111, 8 for 109 and a touchdown. If those are now 5 catches, 6 catches for 60 yards, and we're only seeing touchdowns in half of them, all of a sudden, those look much less appealing. Not this, low to high end wide receiver 1. We're talking about maybe a wide receiver 3, maybe even heaven forbid a wide receiver 4. So there's just a huge, massive range of outcomes. Look, Jared Goff isn't this big arm chucking down the field quarterback, which helps Amon-Ra, but still there's a lot of weapons there now. It'll be interesting to see what his target share is this coming season. Let's go back to the quarterback position. Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia Eagles. Jalen Hurts last year had a ton of quarterback 1 performances, mostly on garbage time and rushing, but had a lot. They improved this team in the offseason, adding A.J. Brown. The offensive line is looking better. Everything is pointing up for Jalen Hurts. So you say, why is he volatile? We're expecting him to be a top 8, if not top 5 fantasy quarterback this season. Why wouldn't people continue to draft him like that next year? Well, if this team doesn't make the playoffs, or if they make the playoffs with an early exit, and Jalen Hurts is just good, but not great from an NFL standpoint, they have 2 first-round picks next year, and there are quite a few quarterbacks in next year's class that could be very, very appealing. We've seen this team do this with Jalen Hurts when they had Carson Wentz. All signs pointed towards Carson Wentz being their guy. There was a little turmoil, kind of like Jalen Hurts right now, a little turmoil, but it wasn't much. Then they drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round, and everything went downhill from there for Carson Wentz. Could the same thing happen with Jalen Hurts? That's definitely a possibility. I don't foresee that happening. I do think this year will be a better year than last year for him, and he will establish himself. But you have to know there is a lot of risk when you're buying Jalen Hurts. Next guy on our list is Kansas City Chief running back Clyde EdwardsHelaire. Now, if you drafted Clyde EdwardsHelaire in your rookie drafts 2 years ago, you are not happy with the performance. In fact, you're downright depressed because you could have had Jonathan Taylor, could have had DeAndre Swift, could have all kinds of receivers, but yet you have Clyde EdwardsHelaire. And after a rookie campaign, his sophomore campaign was downright gross. Missed a bunch of games when he was in there. It was very hit and miss. The past 2 years, only 8 touchdowns combined over those 2 seasons on the ground. Did a little bit in the receiving game as well. We had 800 rushing yards and then down to 500 rushing yards. Now, if he can stay healthy and he can get the full workload, there's a chance that we could have a 1,200-yard rusher with another 600 yards through the air. Definitely in the realm of possibility. That's putting you in that running back 1 territory, if not top half of that running back 1 territory. But he hasn't done it yet. And they did bring in Ronald Jones this year. And so I do think Clyde EdwardsHelaire is a value right now because currently his ADP is down at running back 25. So you definitely have the opportunity to get him at a pretty significant value. However, his value next year could be nothing. Like it could be gone. They could draft somebody else that's a great running back class in 2023. So they could move on and he could have no value. So even though it looks like a value that you're getting him at now, it could completely fall off and he could be worth nothing. However, if he takes this workload, he ends up being the lead guy, if not the main guy in this year's running back room for the Kansas City Chiefs. We could be talking about a low end wide receiver one. He catches a lot of passes, but we could be talking about a low end running back 1 this year. I think it's in the realm of possibility. But as we're saying with all these players, that range is really, really big. Let's head on over to Cleveland and the tight end that just signed a 4-year, $57 million deal is David Njoku. David Njoku's had trouble really being consistent over the course of his career. His only season where he was really relevant at all was 2018. Yeah, 2018. And even that season, he had 50 some catches for 600 some yards, like 4 touchdowns. Nothing to get too excited about. So David Njoku really carries a lot of risk. You add on the fact that we don't know if Deshaun Watson will be throwing him passes, if it'll be Jacoby Brissett, whether it be Baker Mayfield. Like we have no idea who's throwing him passes. So there's a lot of inherent risk there. But they paid him all that money. They paid him $57 million over 4 years, and that's good money for a tight end. And so if they're going to do that, you have to assume that he's going to be heavily, heavily involved in their plans. And on top of that, remove Austin Hooper from the situation, who is now gone. He's the main guy in that tight end room. So there's a lot of upside to catch a ton of passes from a great quarterback, or he might be phased out and because there's not good quarterbacks throwing on the football and Harrison Bryant emerges. Like there's just so much unknown with David Njoku. He could be a tight end 5 for you next year. Could be tight end 35. We just don't know. Last but not least, Davis Mills. Davis Mills as a rookie last year, 2,600 yards, 16 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. And he did that only starting 11 games. Now, while he was in there, he was really effective. Not many people were talking about him as a rookie. He was one of the guys that I kind of liked coming out. Ended up getting taken in the 3rd round, which is okay draft capital. And he got thrown into the fire. And everyone had just assumed that it was not going to go well because on paper, everything wasn't supposed to go well for Houston. But while he was in there, he played really, really well. And so we should be seeing him only progress this year. The problem is they are not a good football team. They're pretty much for sure going to be a top 5 pick. At the very best case scenario for them, pick 8, 9. But either way, they're going to be in range for some quarterbacks, and they could easily take their future quarterback with a new head coach. And I mean, we could even see a new coaching staff next season, but those young quarterbacks are worth their weight in gold in super flex leagues. If you hit on one, instant value just skyrocketing. Right now, he's going right around the 10th round of super flex startups. We could easily see that catapult into round 4 or 5, but we could easily see him not even be their starting quarterback next season. All right, before we get out of here, guys, let's talk about Prize Picks. Prize Picks, it's your best legal place to place those parlays. Yes, you want to get on some futures action. You want to look at rushing yards totals. You want to look at passing touchdowns. You can do that over at Prize Picks. Best of all, promo code NERDS will get you 100% deposit match. So you put in 50, they'll put in 50. You put in 100, they'll put in 100. PrizePicks.com, the best place to get those bets in today.